Thanks everyone for joining today's Space Syntax Lab seminar session. This is the first session in the third term, and we are excited to have Tamir El-Khouly here. He is an associate professor at the American University in Cairo, where he specializes in architecture, digital communication, and building information modeling. He holds a PhD in design studies here from the Bartlett School of Architecture, and has conducted research at various UK universities and institutions. His research interests are broadly around design studies, architectural computing, design thinking, BIM, and graph theory. And today, Tamir will provide insights into his extensive work on the conditions that foster innovation and creative thinking in architectural design processes. And before we start, if you have any questions during the talk, please put them in the chat so that we can address them at the very end. And with this, I'd like to hand over to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Simon, for your kind introduction, for the nice words, and for the invitation. And it's my pleasure to be back to the group of Space Syntax Lab and colleagues since I pursued my PhD a while ago. Welcome everyone to the presentation. I'm going to talk about creative discovery in architectural design processes. So I direct my presentation to PhD researchers, and I note down some steps that may benefit the audience. The first one is prior to starting your investigation, you should identify the research parameters, such as follows. You have to start by asking the following questions. What phenomenon or set of related phenomena am I going to search for? Identify the parameters and or any confounding variables that may or may not have an impact. Next, establish a broad research topic that is particular to the investigation. As an example, I worked on the design studies or the nature of design, which is a broad research topic. However, you could come with, I came with some questions, set of questions to narrow it down to a specific question. So how does the design process operate? Which is a bit specific. What is the process of design thinking? How do original ideas come to reality? What is the nature of the cognitive context in which flashes of mental insight crystallize into creative ideas? So after that, the decision about adopting the research methodology, whether adopting an inductive or logical deductive methodology, depends on the phenomenon that is under investigation. Is it multi-complex and multivariable in nature, or can the relevant variables be controlled by conducting a controlled experiment and testing a certain hypothesis? Are you applying a logical deductive methodology, top-down approach? It's like the flipped cone, or a bottom-up approach. You have different variables, multivariable nature of your phenomenon, and you can't start by a controlled experiment. So you have to gather data and then classify them and to adopt the inductive approach. You may end up having both approaches, both methodologies in your research, which I actually had, and I will explain in a moment. So you may test hypotheses that were postulated by others, but also come up with your own investigation. So you may have different methodologies, depends. The scope of research, this research is about understanding the design processes and creative discoveries, which has piqued interest in the discipline of design studies. Context of research, the presentation explores the architectural design process, focusing on the emergence of creative mental insights and their role in developing original design conceptions. Objectives, it aims to understand the thinking processes of architects during the design process to gain a deeper understanding of environments that foster creativity and innovation. And it aims to define or characterize the development of creative insights, addressing the contentious concept of good ideas or goodness in design quality. The literature, what is being looked for in the research arcade, what is the landscape of schools of thought? The debate on the nature of design process has been split between two major views, the technical rationality and the epistemology of practice. The positivist view, it's another alternative of the technical rationality, another synonym, looks at design is concerned with how things ought to be, targeting the process of making. Design process can be prescribed cyclic according to the positivist view, and design is hierarchical, where ideas are likely to evolve in a top-down way. So this example means that ideas are determined at the beginning of the design process and then broke down into micro objectives to achieve. However, in the practitioner's point of view, design is a reflective conversation with the situation. Considering the aspect of design situation is the locus to interpret the emergence of thoughts. This is the Shunian view, according to Donald Shun, 1983. The algorithmic view looks at design as a procedural subject, such as automated systems. Considering the aspect of design situation is the locus to interpret the emergence of thoughts. This is the scientist's view. Classifying research literature is important because it defines the dilemma in the study field and hence the research question. So, for example, according to the Simonian positivism, technical rationality, design is concerned with how things should be. According to the epistemology of practice of Shunian constructivism, design was viewed as a contemplative dialogue with the environment. One illustration of the paradox in design research is the distinction between these two points of view. The first perspective holds design as a procedural incremental process in which there is a hierarchical relationship between the structure of reasoning, the reasoning process, and the contents, the design outcomes or artifacts. The second perspective holds that design is a reflecting activity, that contextual action is dependent on the surroundings, and that the relationship between contents and structure is transformative. The research question aims to collect this research aims to collect empirical evidence on the nature of design by investigating the question, what role do procedural activities, where each design step reflects a unit in a linear process, and contextual activities, an action based on the situation, environment, and affordances, play in the generation of creative insights, critical design moves, and the formation of concepts in the reasoning process. Creative discovery through sudden mental insights was actually debated according to diversity of viewpoints between principles and assumptions. Identifying the parameters to investigate to answer the question, how do bright ideas emerge? Well, there is actually a controversy in design research about how to interpret the cognitive context behind the emergence of creative mental insights. There are two views debating on that, where creative concepts are formed. The technical rationality school sees insights emerge through an incremental process. A mental insight is a stimulus response retrieval from memory. Insights take a trial and error structured approach. According to Weisberg model 1986, insight problems depend more on retrieval of specific past experience rather than cognitive restructuring of the design problem. While the practitioner's school looks at insights emerge through a rapid cognitive restructuring process, a mental insight is a breakthrough based on rapid cognitive restructuring of the design problem. It is discontinuous and emergent and emerges beyond our awareness. According to the Gestalt model, problems are not initially solved because subjects make inappropriate assumptions about the problems. So identifying two parameters here, reframing the solution versus restructuring the design problem, is the parameters to investigate through the empirical case studies. A sample video protocol for a design process via freehand sketching is here. We can look at this video now. This architect was designing a pavilion for an export for a country. She was designing for Greece, and she went through different projections of different ideas. She was switching back and forth between them, but also sometimes she was crystallizing an idea by drawing different projections or circulating different projections for it. So she started by the interlocking cones, that cube on the left side. The interlocking cones defines the Greek nature. She was designing now perspective section with some natural elements like the pool. Later on, she will include the olive tree and lemon trees. She's designing, she's sketching actually a plan for the same idea. Looks like she's working on depth, but the idea was already determined. Sometimes we are highlighting special elements in the drawing. Being an ethnographer observant of such process makes me wonder, is every single action in the design process includes a creative moment? Do ideas emerge across, or there are events where we actually work in depth on achieving or executing an idea, but there are some other moments that are more creative or about crystallizing a concept. On the right side, the sketchboard where she started her designing from, and she was actually sketching some conceptual seeds, what the context of Greece is about. And then she started visiting back and forth that conceptual seeds or elements. Now she's designing a configuration for a master plan or layout for different buildings that should imitate that concept of interlocking forms. The video was put in speed to make it fast. However, there were some thinking moments in between. We can see when she stops sketching. And all of these were taken into consideration. We wanted to segment the design process into structural units of thinking and then find the relationships between them. Now she returned back to the original of the first sketch to complete her concept. I would say in a 1 hour of this design process, the designer sketched about 5 different pavilions, switching back and forth. Some of them are related to the firstly sketched scenes, but some of them were completely disconnected from the flow, especially at the end. So I will stop the video here, not to waste much of our time. Analysis is analyzing the design process about describing it or prescribing it. Adopting the epistemology of practice approach, investigating the reflective practice between the designer's mind and the artifact, such as external cognitive structures to think with, makes us think about the analytical methods following Donald Schoen 1983. A descriptive method to characterize the design process and the cognitive environment in which insights arise must be developed. The epistemology of practice school looks at design as a transformational process, such as what Goldschmidt and Weil introduced 1996. Is design best described as a procedural entity or a contextual entity, an action of environment and affordances? We are going to explore a bit more about this question. Linkography to investigate creative discovery in design processes. Linkography protocol is a graphical representation for the series of events that can be observed to occur in the design process, and it was first developed by Gabriel Goldschmidt in 1990. It is constructed from nodes that represents each segment in the design process based on parsing the dependency relationships between those nodes. When there is a relationship, we draw that triangle, and when there is no, we don't do any. We don't draw any. Linkography has a time factor because it is directed to the time of emergence of design segments. Actually, I came up with that simplified graph. I called it archaeography or archaeograph as a simplified graphical representation developed by us, El-Khouly and Penn in 2012. The nature of design as a multi-level complex process. It is a multi-level system, and its complexity is created at different scales. It has a micro and a macro scale. It might have a social network beyond it. And the question is there a social logic behind creativity in linkographs is valid? In what ways do linkographs help us in the investigation of multi-level design complexity? So how a complex system is viewed through two views: the macro view for the set of relationships. If we have the overall design process, it includes some sets of networks, and then the sets of networks, each set includes some items that are related together. So if we look at the whole set, we mean the whole group together, the whole group of items and how they relate. Okay, this is the macro scale view. Okay, so we can look at the whole set as is. However, there is the micro view looking at the relationships established at a single design item. So how the item is related to the preceding events, but also the subsequent events, which is more valuable because the aha moment or the creative insight emerge in the local scale or the item scale. So is creativity quantifiable, or is this hypothesis is this a hypothesis testing approach? Many scholars have proposed this finding, actually, which has sparked controversy among us. It claims that creativity is dependent on productivity or the richness of activities throughout the design process, and the creative mental insight may be predicted using a quantitative measure called the link index according to Goldschmidt 1990 or Shannon entropy according to Canangero 2008. The application of Shannon's entropy to linkographs is successful in looking at the overall structure of a set or the overall structure of items, though it doesn't take the arrangement and distribution of items into consideration. For example, we have two different linkographs in the arrangement, but they have the same quantity of relationships, and Shannon entropy gives the same result after all. So the Shannon entropy looks at the overall. And this is what I meant by the hypothesis testing approach or the top-down approach, that you may face as a researcher, you may face some postulated hypotheses or results that you need to test through the process and assess whether you are going to adopt them or not. This study highlights the importance of examining the relationship between richness and productivity of activities and the emergence of creative insights while designing, as well as bringing metrics beyond information measurements such as syntactic and network analysis into linkography. It also emphasizes the need to combine qualitative and quantitative descriptive methods in the design process. The changing state is where a multi-level complex system paradox resides between order, structure, and disorder in linkography and space syntax. This was our publication in 2012. A grid system is perceived as a highly organized structure if and only if it delivers variable chances to navigate from one place to another. I recall the example of Barcelona master planning. It is highly intelligible only in this circumstance, but to some extent it can be confusing. In a symmetrical and identical system, the explorer has equal chances to move from one point to another and might get lost. Both highly ordered and disordered states are extreme examples in terms of intelligibility. What deserves attention is how we construct a system. Hanson, 1989, has pointed that order must be misleading about its function and that it could be a manifestation of another underlying state. So the structure state of any system needs a variation of characteristics in order to construct an intelligible system. So I come up with this concept, which is about extracting strings of information for the subnetwork of relationships that are created at each level of an individual item. In the design process, we call them moves, actions, or nodes, by adopting the deterministic information theory for Titchener, 1998, and the group, and Ulrich Speidel, 2006. And then we pose the question, how can we distinguish between the multivariant states of a design process network of dependency relationships? The so-called string of information extracted from the linkograph has a level of complexity in its arrangement of symbols and binary, and can thus indicate the multi-level complexity of the design process at the level of the network of local relationships, dependencies created at each element in the design process, along with preceding and subsequent design activities. So actually, at any point, we have a relationship to the preceding, which can be transformed into a string of information and the four links as well. And then you can concatenate the whole string of information and then process some complexity measurements, information measurements, to see how complicated and how the surprising events occur in the design process. And that was actually importantly cited by Gabriel Goldschmidt in 2014 in the book Unfolding the Design Process. El-Khouly and Penn, 2012, sought to relate linkographs and graphs of urban systems used in space syntax studies. Such systems are very complex, and the authors investigated and measured properties of linkographs. So a proposed qualitative approach to construct the linkograph on the basis of making comparisons between successive design outcomes. The context for multivariant factors involved in the design process could be the nature of the design brief, such as if it's structured, constrained with conditions and functional requirements, or unstructured, giving free rein for the architect to design with no constraints. The role of the design tool, conventional freehand sketching or computational, the design experiment settings, solo or collaborative. These are all factors that can be involved in the design process. The task that I showed a while ago was about creating a pavilion for a country of your own choice at the upcoming expo. Back then it was Shanghai 2010 in 1 hour using freehand sketches. That was actually specific, and this was a pilot study that were later replicated with several architects, and it was contrasted by completely different design task, which was constrained and conditioned with a functional requirement program, and it was about designing a cheese factory. So I conducted my study by diversifying the nature of design problem, but in my presentation here, I only show the pilot study. A workflow to create a linkograph or to use linkography as a process. A qualitative assessment of the development in the design process and the dependency relationships is necessary to build the linkograph. This can be done by conducting a bilateral comparison of every 2 design episodes and determining whether they are interrelated in the design content or not. Interpreting the mutation relationship from one episode to another, whether it is incremental or sudden. Determining the extent of the influence of a single design episode or a group of episodes on the formation of the design concept, or confirm it by implementing it across different parallel projections. Moreover, the retrospective design architect's comments on the design process is listened to and is arranged into the development of the idea. through the arrangement of design sketches. So this was actually a model that I developed. So segmenting the sketching episodes into structural units of thinking, as they are the outcomes of a thinking process that we have no understanding of, and creating pairwise comparisons of sequential sketching episodes, of those sequential sketching episodes. The segmentation is about identifying the starting and ending point of each episode, and coding is about detecting the dependence relationship between sketching episodes using pairwise comparisons, judging the change of idea from one state to another against the appearance of sudden paradigm shift. As such, coding the dependency relationships and construct the linkograph. This is to overcome any subjective interpretation of coding the linkograph. So the resulting linkograph used transcription of the design process, used retrospective descriptions made by the architect, and then it was constructed in this way. The linkograph has a nature of pattern that we can understand either by looking at the metrics and measurements by a quantifiable approach, such as using integration space syntax from space syntax or deterministic information theory measurements, such as computing its information content or complexity or entropy for concatenated or directed graphs using backlinks only. We can also apply social network analysis. A thorough assessment of the synchronous and asynchronous diachronic configuration of dependence relationships throughout the design process using the linkograph. Referring back to Hillier, 1998, when he described the difference between whole and parts in complex systems. Configuration is a necessary strategy to look at the design process because complexity of relation has two key properties of the whole. First, a complex appears to be different when looked at from different points, and second, changing a part of a spatial complex is likely to change the structure properties of the whole. And by this, I thought to compare two different formation of the linkograph. One that is synchronic, assessing the preceding events at each node by looking at its concatenated, looking at its string of information, but also to concatenate the backlinks and the forelinks at each node and see how the structure properties has happened. If there is a drastic change between the synchronous and diachronic, then it's a point of investigation. I'm not saying yet that it is a creative moment, but we have to refer back to the transformation from a sketch to another, looking at the retrospective comments by the architect and judging if they have similar content or completely different. Generating a cascade of justifying graphs for each action taking place and computing information and syntactic measures for each event, thus showing a fluctuation of results along the linkograph. There are different of networks, as we know, and we can apply depth measures and investigate the moment, not only quantitatively, but qualitatively. Identifying the critical events of significant concept formation, whether gradual, evolutionary, or revolutionary dramatic paradigm shifts. The following occurrences can be considered critical moves. The events where the concept has been reframed, the events where the concept changed or the problem was restructured, the switching moments from the switching events involves moving from a design medium to another, from a sketch to another, testing the interchange and comparison of information events at the beginning and finish of a design activity in a certain medium is most likely responsible for back for linking. On the right side, we have justified graphs. for the backlinks only, but also down there, which I call directed, but down there it's the undirected. It concatenates the backlinks and full links, and then you can come up with completely different networks, and you can compare them with the sketching transformation. Multiple possibilities for the influence of creative discoveries arising on the structure of the design process. There are bridging nodes, transferring knowledge from a chunk of thought to another, and disconnecting events completely disconnect from the flow. And these are patterns of or different configurations of how transferring points happen according to the empirical study I conducted, and configuration of independent disconnected events. And I started to visit the linkograph patterns and understand them a bit more. Identifying the role and level of contribution that structural design units contribute to the creativity of the design process by inferring the patterns from the linkograph. These sketches or these configurations were actually referenced to Sternberg's model 2003, where he actually distinguished between actions or qualities that preserve the flow, the existing paradigm, and other actions that defy the flow. So the replication, redefinition of the concept, forward incrementation, building on what has been decided, advanced forward incrementation, are like the four here, are actually types of actions that preserve the flow. And these patterns were actually inferred according to my study and to his configuration. Also, we have types of actions that defy the flow or defy the crowd, and I come up with some patterns that can be deduced from the empirical study. Directed linkography was our paper published in 2013, and it's a new contribution to the field, can be found there. In conclusion, sudden mental insights act as key anchors for creative leaps in design processes. The context behind the emergence of creative insights take two prime forms. The incremental form is where design thinking takes a convergent mode, leading to reframing the solution all the way through the end. The sudden breakthrough mode is where design reasoning takes a divergent mode, leading to restructuring the design problem and reformulating the configuration. Both contexts can be represented through linkography patterns where two cognitive styles for architects are highlighted. The convergent mode is shown via consistent dense patterns of short links. The divergent mode is shown via long back and fore linking. The procedural components are subsets in solving the design problem for synchronic concept development or implementation of the predefined conceptual idea, whereas contextual components relate to a comprehensive view to solve the design problem through concept synthesis of back and forth linking between the diachronic stages of the design process. There are two architectural designing styles are identified. Some architects define the concept early in the design process, set goals, and preserve in framing and reframing this concept until the end, whereas some others initiate the concept by designing independent conceptual elements and then proceed to form syntheses for the design configuration. So the mental insights are most likely to emerge from the unexpected combination of syntheses, particular in the latter style. This is a link to download my PhD dissertation through UCL Discovery, and thank you so much for your attention.